Hello, everybody. Good evening if you are in Europe. Good morning if you are on the other side of the ocean in the United States or Central America. Good evening and good night if you are in Asia or Southeast Asia. Welcome finally back to the Austrian Economics Monthly. We have been away for a couple of months for the Christmas and the New Year holidays, and now we're back. End of January, and from now on, every end of the month on the last Thursday of the month, we're back with our discussion on the Austrian Economics Monthly that is hosted by the Austrian Economic Center and by Competere. And I'm here in Rome. It's Pietro Paganini. And today I'm very happy to, introduce the discussion about what is happening right now at the world and the global level with the pandemic, and particularly if we are experiencing a great reset and what are the consequences of this reset. And it was 2 years ago almost when exactly here in Italy, not far away from where I am right now, the COVID-19, this incredible new virus just hit Italy. And you remember, and let me be a bit proud Italians, that the rest of the world was looking at us saying, oh, those are the Italians, they're crying, wimping a bit too much about this virus. It's just a flu. Well, things went very differently, and we know how they went. Unfortunately, with 1 year of basically full lockdown all around the world, and then with a return to prosperity and to growth, but at the same time, with what we are experiencing right now with the great inflation, with consequences that are very different in the United States, here in Europe, elsewhere around the world. But certainly the cost of life has been increasing all around the world, and the poorest are the ones that are paying the higher price. The Central Bank of Europe and the Central Bank of the United States, namely the Fed, are taking different positions on whether to stop pumping money into the economy, whether to increase the interest rate. But let's see what will happen. Well, I have a beautiful panel of speakers today, and I'm very happy to have my friend and partner here from the Austrian Economic Center in Vienna right now, Barbara Kohl. Barbara, good evening, and very happy to have you here. And then we also have from the United States, Dan Mitchell, and then I assume in Europe, I think in Austria or in Germany, we have Christoph Zellenberg here with us. But before reading your bio, if you don't know this distinguished speaker, but I assume you have all the information. Let me do a very quick housekeeping here. This is the Austrian Economic Monthly, hosted every Thursday, last Thursday of the month. This event is broadcasted on YouTube and Facebook, and is of course recorded and will be available on our website. Please invite your friends. Please make sure that everybody's following, because these are interesting discussion. Make sure that all your friends can also rewatch our conversation, because they are available online. Let me start with Barbara. Barbara, you here with me?
Yes, I am here with you, and I can see you and hear you very well. Thank you for hosting our first Austrian Economics Monthly this year in 2022, which is truly an interesting time. After 2 years of more or less lockdowns and the pandemic all across Europe, the world actually, we see that the world has changed. What 2 years, actually 3 years ago, was heavily discussed when a book was published called The Great Reset. Everybody thought, well, why do those people know more than we do? Well, either it was coincidence, or we will definitely have to deal with a reset, because I don't think we can go back to normal. You already mentioned inflation. You already mentioned interest rates. Where will they go? You already mentioned the amount of money in circulation. But what we have not discussed yet is, for example, the so-called Green Deal, that is a big issue for Europe, where both the European Central Bank has said that they would do something on this front, but especially Brussels is involved in the entire green reset as well. And there I think we see people becoming more alert, but this was kind of all 2 years ago. And now, after 2 years of COVID, the mindset has probably shifted to also other things like freedom, things like entrepreneurial and individual freedom, and how we can regain it and what we can do in order to fight this pandemic, but most importantly, how to find solutions that the markets will work again. Because you might all remember that all of a sudden, the so-called 4 European freedoms that we all had in mind did not work anymore. We could not move goods from A to B in Europe because of the pandemic. Borders were locked again. Harsh controls were put into place, but also the freedom of movement of labor was put into question. And all those things from one day to the other. So freedoms were limited, and we have to rethink how we will create growth again. And also, of course, we see different issues now with sovereign debts, or actually we don't know, not issues, but it is a fact that sovereign debt has risen tremendously. And also due to certain other policies, there is a question of inflation. Where will it go? Right now, there is the opinion, especially from authorities, that this is just transitory. But if it's not, then we all have a problem. And in order to fight that, or in order to avoid those problems, there will have to be a reset. And what is the reset? The reset is probably in our minds. We need to see what is important, what creates growth. And I think my fellow participants here on this panel will also cover a part of those issues, whether it's the tax issue that Dan Mitchell has always focused on, but it's also social issues and philosophical questions that maybe Christoph will cover. So having said that, the issue of points where we can trigger reform and can change things are multiple. And I would just simply ask the next speaker to cover the next topic, and ask you, Pietro, to moderate and trigger the right questions, not only by the audience, but also to us, where we see solutions for this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara, very much for your introduction, and I'm very happy to see you again. We met last time in Washington, D.C., and we had to rush to the airport also to get back to our countries. Otherwise, with this new regulation, constant fluid regulation, we risk to stay stuck in the United States. That is not a bad thing, but still, it's still the most free country in the world. But we wanted to get back to our families. Let me move to Dan. For the one of you that do not know Dan Mitchell, Dan is public policy economist in Washington, D.C. His major research interests include the tax reform, national tax competition, the economic burden of government spending, and other fiscal policies. Dan was a senior fellow with the Cato Institute for 11 years and spent more than 17 years as an economist at the Heritage Foundation. I was saying a communist. Sorry. Earlier in his career, he served as an economist for Senator Bob Peckwood of Oregon and was director of tax and budget policy for Citizens for a Sun. And for more than 3 years in the mid-90s, Dan began every day by co-hosting the morning show on NET, the political news talk network. Barbara is talking of a reset, and with COVID, actually, there was a big reset. But when you reset something, we usually do it with our phones. We set our phones, we reset our computer. It means we start all over again. The question is, and it's not really a tax question, and I know you're an expert in taxation, it's more a philosophical question, as Barbara said. What is the reset that we expect here? What's the interface once we turn on our economies, our society again? What's the interface we would be dealing with?
Because of the pandemic, a lot of the traditional political and economic alliances and structures did get upended. And the question is, what do we get next? And unfortunately, as Barbara already said, we're getting a lot more government spending, and I think that one consequence of the pandemic and all the emergency spending that governments did is that we're probably even closer to another debt crisis causing havoc in the world. Could this new debt crisis, when will it occur? Will it affect bigger countries that are basically impossible to bail out? I think that's a very major concern. I don't know whether you call that a reset or just a consequence of fiscal profligacy, but I think it's something that we are going to have to deal with as a result of what's been happening. And of course, one thing that's happened in terms of fiscal policy that I do think represents a fundamental break with the past is that politicians around the world have conspired together to create this global corporate minimum tax. And what worries me about this is not just the principle of explicit tax harmonization being imposed upon the world and in effect penalizing jurisdictions that choose to have more growth with lower tax rates. But I worry very much about the precedent that is being created as a result of this kind of policy. We already have politicians in many countries saying, well, the 15% minimum tax for companies, that's too low. It should be 25% or even higher. And I think they're just a matter of time before we start seeing that minimum rate increase. But perhaps even more worrisome to me is that they're going to extend this template of tax harmonization. They're going to extend it to other taxes, the personal income tax. Of course, there's already a minimum value added tax in Europe, but if they do it on the personal income tax, if they impose it on capital gains taxes, if they want to impose a global minimum death taxes and wealth taxes. I mean, these are the kinds of things that politicians have always wanted to do because they don't like tax competition. But then let me, as part of my brief remarks, also touch on another aspect of whether or not there's been a reset. And let's talk about what the I don't want to say the left because I don't think the Davos crowd is left per se, but the establishment's view of a reset because the Davos crowd explicitly talked about a great reset where they wanted to have stakeholder capitalism rather than shareholder capitalism. They want to have environmental, social, and governance standards, the so-called ESG standards, where profit maximization and free markets are no longer a major part of how the economy should function. Now, in part, I think that some people are drawn to stakeholder capitalism rather than shareholder capitalism because they misread what Milton Friedman said. Milton Friedman has a very famous quote about the social responsibility of a corporation is to make profits for shareholders. And a lot of people think, oh, he just wants companies to be greedy and maybe sell us tainted food or to pollute the environment. Well, they ignore the rest of Friedman's quote that of course that goal to maximize shareholder value and to maximize profits has to be consistent with ethical behavior and norms. So Milton Friedman in no way was implying that corporations should act unethically. He was simply saying that in a free market economy, trying to be more efficient, generate more profits is what's consistent not only with the best interest of shareholders, but in the best interest of the entire economy. So when I see these various interest groups around the world pushing for so-called stakeholder capitalism, in part, I think it's empty posturing. We had an issue in the United States where a trade association of big companies called the Business Roundtable, the CEO signed this letter talking about the wonders of stakeholder capitalism. Well, economists who have since looked at what the behavior of those companies was found no change. As a matter of fact, found that these companies were more likely to conduct layoffs and things like that. So it wasn't as if this was anything other than, I guess you would call it virtue signaling. And so hopefully this issue doesn't actually lead to genuine cronyism, because that's my concern. If you actually follow through, some of the people who advocate for stakeholder capitalism, they do want government to put a thumb on the scale. They do want government to intervene and have more power. They have this sort of vision of big business and big government sitting down together, I guess, with big labor probably as well, to sort of plan an economy. And fundamentally, this is, and I'll close on this point. Fundamentally, I think this is a reaction by the established powers against creative destruction. Because what was it Joseph Schumpeter said, that a fundamental characteristic of a free market economy is that you periodically have new inventions, new technologies, new innovations that disrupt the existing power structure. Well, if you're the CEO of a big Fortune 500 company, you are part of that power structure. And you probably don't like the idea of some new upstart competitor, some new innovator who suddenly reduces the value of your company and potentially the value of your stock holdings and the value of your CEO compensation and things like that. So if you're big and powerful already, you don't want dynamic capitalism. You want status quo capitalism, which I think is a good description of a so-called stakeholder capitalism. So I'm hoping that this pandemic doesn't lead to big government and big business getting in bed together to try to dictate the economy, because the rest of us will be poorer as a result, and especially the parts of the world that need more prosperity, I think, will suffer under that kind of model. So I'll go ahead and close there. I've probably gone over my 5 minutes, but so many big issues for us to discuss.
Thank you so much, Dan, because I actually like very much the fact that you have recognized that there is a status quo capitalism that is probably actually contrasting with the free market idea. Usually, free market and capitalism should walk together. In this case, we see that there is a capitalism that is actually owning its own means of production, but does not want others basically to creatively destruct and bring breakthroughs, innovation, and invention into the world to change the economy and exactly to increment knowledge as well and to move our society ahead. And that's a very interesting point, as well as you pointed out this global coalition for a minimum tax. And you also have touched upon a very important point about this tremendous debt that many countries are actually accumulating. And this is something that once the pandemic is gone, hopefully and forever, we will have to deal with. Dan, you were not actually over time. You were perfectly. This is also a smart brevity approach that we have. We want to provide very good, thoughtful ideas that help people not taking a position, but developing their own opinions and hopefully doing so to increment and implement and actually enhance our individual liberty. I want to move. Our next speaker is always three speakers, and today is Christopher Zellenberg, who currently serves as president of the Europa Institute, a public policy think tank that is located actually in Austria, and is lectures internationally on economics, tax policy, the welfare state, Catholic social teaching, Christian anthropology. And in short, as he likes to say, anything to economics and ethics. And today he is also a private equity investor and financial advisor focusing on capital markets, new technology, and real estate. Christopher, I'm coming to you, and I just want to remind everybody that if you are interested in reading the full biographies of our distinguished speakers, you can go on the Austrian Economic Center, and you can find all the bio speakers of the speakers of all the free market roadshow events and or the Austrian Economics Monthly. Let me come to you, Christoph. Do you see this reset happening, and do you agree with Barbara and Dan of this new start? And do you agree that the new start doesn't look promising, and probably there is the need for a freedom fighter coalition to make sure that those principles, one of Alan Friedman and the one that was just mentioned of Schumpeter, are still here and help humanity in enhancing our free market liberties?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I'm dialing in right now from Romania, from Bucharest. I was asked to add a little bit the philosophical and ethical background to this discussion. And in fact, to put it straight, for centuries, people wanted to change the way societies and the world works. Never-ending social experiments were performed and failed for a long time. And the Great Reset is nothing else than another try. Actually, from my opinion, there are two major groups of thought here. The first group, that's things we can learn from the past, we can build upon what we learned, and we can strive for a better future by leaving man alone to take his educated decisions. This means freedom of the individual, free entrepreneurship, low taxes, no redistribution, but charity and minimum regulation. We think, and I guess all of us in this call now belong more or less to the first group, we think that the multitude of preferences, priorities, and decisions of millions of people will lead to the best possible outcome, if not always in the short run, but still in the mid and long term. But on top of it, this group also understands that in order to take responsible decisions, which also include the good of our neighbors and society as a whole, we need to understand our responsibility and accountability towards first our neighbor and to a higher instance, which has set certain predefined rules and conditions for the best of mankind and all creation. And the shortest and best summary of these rules can be found in the Ten Commandments. And now there is the other group, group two, as I call it, that thinks the multitude of choices will not lead to the best possible outcome. But politics and bureaucrats have to intervene, have to regulate, have to steer society, and have to plan and control all the way. They do not trust the honesty and decency of the human being. In brackets, probably because they are not honest and decent themselves. For that, they need to build up huge bureaucracies, which cost a lot of money. And more than that, they have to pay off their constituencies via redistribution of funds. This leads to high regulation, high taxes, and ultimately, all that leads to diminishing individual freedom and entrepreneurship, innovation and development. This second group understands only too well that everything that holds them back from achieving their goal of an all-regulated society must be eliminated. And this is all social groups and entities outside their control, where people find and live their morals and responsibilities towards others, and especially this highest entity I was talking before, to whom we are ultimately always responsible. In order to be successful with their new social engineering, the old established and well-working social entities need to be destroyed. And this is mainly marriage, the family, the church, and faith in God, private charities, and most private institutions. The Great Reset is nothing new. It's the same old story. The government can do better. This is group two, alive and fighting. And all that is not new. It started, latest during the Enlightenment, the High Enlightenment, with the encyclopedists who also strove to rewrite history in order to eliminate the experience of the past, unroot the people, destroy traditional groups and fundaments, such as especially marriage, family, and belief in God. What was born out of that was nationalism and the nation state, because something had to take place of God and the church. And then it was socialism, because the state had to take over what was left behind when old structures were abolished, such, for example, the friendly societies, which were replaced by social welfare and social security. And it's naked individualism, materialism, and naked and unbridled reason. Remember the old story when the revolutionaries in France vandalized the Cathedral of Notre Dame and raised a then famous prostitute to be venerated on the high altar as goddess of reason. See the parallels today with all the virologists, mathematicians, statisticians, epidemiologists, medical doctors, pharmacologists, and all of them mostly always wrong. So, after the huge socialist revolutions and their consecutive breakdowns, came new prophets of Group 2. There was, for example, the Club of Rome and its teaching of overpopulation, the Cold War with threat of nuclear fallout, the invention of fiat money and the abandonment of asset-backed money, the climate alarmists, and recently, the pandemic. Though some of the underlying thoughts might be well considerable, and we need to find proper answers to real problems, much of it is used to achieve exactly the same ends as Group 2 always tried to achieve and were described before. So what would be the wrong consequences of our current situation? Would be to follow the teachings of the new prophet of Group 2, Klaus Schwab and his friends, and their teaching of the Great Reset. What would be the right consequences? Follow the thoughts of Group 1. Believe in the reason and the morals of the human being. Trust in our ultimate responsibility before God, but also his guidance and healing powers, and become proud, self-reliable, responsible, morally strong, and well-educated human beings who are free to find the best solutions for any existing or upcoming problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christoph, for this enlightening description of these two groups that you have been highlighting here, and basically the two options. I was watching Matrix at the cinemas a few days ago, and there was the old stories of the pill, and basically here you have two pills, so you have to choose one, following the truth, or just waking up where we are. Let me go, since we're at the 30 minutes, and we usually want to stay within the 45, maximum 50 minutes to maintain a live discussion that bring a flavors to our audience and a matter of reflection. Barbara here, Dan and Christoph has really took seriously your words, and they have brought a lot of topics for discussion. And I forgot or to summarize earlier in Dan's talk about stakeholder capitalism and shareholder capitalism, and it seems, though, that listening to the two of them, that when we think about this reset, it's not really a reset. It's actually starting with the same bugs inside our computer. So we turn off the computer because there was a bug. We turn on it again, and there are more bugs than before, isn't that?
Well, thanks. I think the question is, if we look at the data, and I'm just going to quote a couple of numbers with regards to economic growth. And we all know that we need economic growth in order to have well-being for everybody, because without that we cannot reinvent the wheel. So in the euro area, we will grow this year approximately by 4.2%. I mean, this are the revised numbers. In 2023, only by 2.9%. UK this year 4%, 2023 1.6%. Japan is this year with 2.6 and less in 2023 with 1.3. China 5%. And remember, they had growth rates that were 10 around, and now we are next year in 5.3. The US this year 4.2. And next year with 3%. So globally, without euro area, we are 4.5% for this year. That is nothing in contrast to what we have lost in the past 2 years. So those are the facts. But why did I quote them? The reason is because we need to ask ourselves, what are the tasks of government, of those institutions to govern us and to rule us? What is their task? Is it, as Christoph already mentioned, constant intervention in our private and entrepreneurial lives? Or is it the other part? Is it more economic freedom, individual freedom? Is it going back and allowing us to be self-responsible individuals? Is it to have competition, working again, competitive, really competing with each other in order to be able to create, as Dan already mentioned and quoted Schumpeter, we need to be able to compete in order to find out the best ways that for a solution, to have something new, as Schumpeter said, and then we can allow ourselves to throw overboard the old things. And those two things cannot be achieved or cannot be reached without the achievement principle. And the achievement principle tells us that we ourselves as individuals need to constantly work hard and work on ourselves to reach our goals. And it's not the task of the state to deliver certain things to us. We need to do it ourselves. And that's why I put the most important question is, what is the task of the state and of the government at the forefront? So if whatever you think, whether it's which group calls the big reset, whatever we do, we always need to first ask ourselves, what is the task of the state? Before that, if we have not answered that, we may talk about a reset, but it will not get us anywhere.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Dan, I am turning to you by Barbara. What's the task of our government? What the task of the state? But I also want to add a question, since you see that this time we are using a new platform, so new year, actually reset also for us here at the Austrian Economics Monthly, and we have a new platform. And in the new platform, you can post the questions exactly next to our on the screen, next to where you see the speakers. And there is a question by Scott, Dan, that you probably are able to read on your own, but I read it for you. Dan, why has the global corporate tax this time received such universal assent? And then this time around, why don't individual government want to, I assume government, want to undercut each other by offering lower taxes?
Going all the way back to the end of last century, politicians and interest groups on the left have been advocating for tax harmonization instead of tax competition. Now, if you pay attention to normal theories of competition and monopolies, in a genuine private sector, monopolies can't be successful because there's always an incentive on the part of some business to come in and take away customers by offering competitive and low prices. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way with governments because, yes, when this whole initiative first began, you had a few governments like Ireland and Hungary and Estonia in the European Union who were complaining because they saw this as a threat. But then, in effect, they were bought off. They were told, well, but if you go along with this, we can shut down places that had even lower taxes, like Cayman Islands and Bermuda. We can undermine the competitive efficiency of some of the Asian tiger economies like Taiwan and Singapore and Hong Kong. Of course, China's undermining Hong Kong anyhow, so maybe you don't have to worry about that as much. But the bottom line is that you had the biggest and most powerful countries in the world, basically Germany, France, the US, Japan, and a few others. They were on the side of a global corporate minimum tax. And they were, in effect, able to bully and cajole and bribe every other significant economy in the world into going along with this. And then if you're a small, low tax economy, let's say you're Liechtenstein or something, you don't have any power to stop this big global tax cartel. And then, of course, if the global tax cartel officially goes into effect, because right now they're still in the sort of design and implementation phase, if it goes into effect and there's a holdout country like Liechtenstein, well, then the big countries say, we're going to impose financial protectionism against you. We're not going to allow deductions for cross-border economic activity. Now, in theory, all this stuff would be in gross violation of the rules of the World Trade Organization for neutral and equal treatment. But basically, if the big governments in the world are on the wrong side of an issue, they can pressure. I mean, they already have pressured the OECD into becoming a tax harmonization bureaucracy. Of course, they'll pressure the WTO to ignore world trade rules and allow financial protectionism. So it's very hard for me to be optimistic right now, especially with the left in control of the United States, because the U.S. is the 800-pound gorilla of the world economy. And if the U.S. is on the wrong side, it makes it very easy for some of these bad ideas to be pursued.
Thank you, Dan, so much. Actually, I got the news that I'm the only privileged I can see the question, so I have to read the question with my terrible English. Actually, there is a comment by Ziga saying, whatever the issue, our friends think the solution is revolution, reset, destruction of what has worked in the past. This is in direct opposition to the Hayekian evolution of spontaneous order. But there is also a question by Martin. Martin is asking to all panelists, what do you suggest each individual should do in the next years to thrive in times of crisis or in the Great Reset? So, Christoph, I'm coming to you with this question by Martin.
Yeah, well, very simple and very hard at the same time. The only thing we can do, first, run for politics ourselves and try to implement our ideas there. Second, to remember the politicians we know, we are in touch with, or we can approach about the freedom of the individual, and kind of point out, as I did, for example, with a friend yesterday, who is in a local in the local Styrian parliament, that we are already living in an overregulated society, and we should build back and push back regulation rather than increasing regulation. For example, you've heard that we have a compulsory vaccination mandate now in Austria, which is totally against human rights and totally against the deregulation thought. People don't understand that, but we give the governments, we give the politicians too many possibilities to intervene into our private lives. And if I can just revert very briefly to what was said before, the question before, why do governments globally strive for global taxation? Very simple, because with that, they can always retreat from their own responsibility. They can always stay in front of their constituency and say, well, it was not us, it's just an international regulation. What can we do? It's simply to camouflage the international agenda of what I called the group two. And whatever you can do to push responsibility out of your direct field of influence and to raise it to a higher level, to some global international body, some global government, is makes life a lot easier and politicians a lot less controllable through their electorate. So I think it's all about camouflaging the agenda of Group Two. And it's very, very dangerous. We should rather take back responsibilities from the global international level to the more local level. This is called subsidiarity, and we need to strengthen the principle of subsidiarity in our political day-to-day life. I think this is what we are supposed to do.
Let me.
Thanks, Christoph. Yeah, Barbara, I'm coming to you because this concept of subsidiary is very interesting, and I think we can put it in our agenda for some next in-depth or more in-depth dedicated discussion. Barbara, I'm coming to you, but answering the question of Martin, yes, we should ask the task of government. But what can each individual do?
Well, again, since Hayek was quoted before, the concept of spontaneous order is, I think, first thing. The second thing is that the subsidiarity principle that Christoph was just describing, and people keep forgetting that this means that what can be solved on a local level should be solved on the local level and must not be delegated to, say, the national level or the regional level. So always stick to the smallest entity and there find the right solution, because after all, and we see that in Europe all over, we are a diverse people, and the diversity of Europe has brought us growth and all this wonderful historical background and history and achievements that we see these days. Without this diversity and with the one-size-fits-all policies that we see these days, we will not go anywhere. The real thing in humanity is that we, all four of us discussing here, we are totally different. We might have same ideas with regards to economic solutions, but in the end, we are individual human beings who have their own goals and who want to pursue them themselves. And we know best for ourselves what is good for us. So we don't want the intervention by, say, government or by anybody else. We need to come back to the self-responsibility. And if we don't make especially the next generation, understand that they have their own fate in their hands, We will probably go to the one size fits all politics where everybody loses. And I think economic growth and well being can only be achieved if we go away from the one size fits all solutions.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Let's do a very quick round of one question to end our first 2022 discussion. We started with the Great Reset. The idea was, okay, are we in facing a new? What will be our future? How do we challenge our future? Here we have an option. Two groups, two pills. We have to pick one. But before ending with that, I think it was a beautiful metaphor. Dan, first of all, thanks for being here with us. I understand from the United States. You talk in depth of this debt, but how do you think the world and each country can actually deal with this tremendous amount of money that we owe ourselves, basically?
There's no way of unringing the bell. The debt has already been incurred, the money's already been spent. The first goal is to stop digging the hole even deeper. I'm a big fan of the so-called debt brake that Switzerland has, which is really a spending cap. If you basically tell governments that you can only increase government spending, say, 2% a year, well, so long as your private economy is growing by more than 2% a year, and don't forget the private economy is your tax base, a spending cap is a very successful way of putting a long run restraint on the growth of government. And again, if that growth of government is smaller than the growth of the private sector, you will eventually, slowly but surely, begin to reduce the debt burden as a share of GDP, and therefore the extent to which it actually is a danger to your economy. If we keep going the way we're going now, with governments growing faster than the private economy, that means that government spending is going to consume a larger and larger share of the economy's output, which in all likelihood means ever higher tax rates. That's a recipe for more Greek style fiscal crises in the future. This is what I'm afraid is going to happen in a lot of countries. I think is if it wasn't for the fact that the European Central Bank was in effect buying up a lot of the government debt that's being issued, I think Italy may very well already be in a Greek style fiscal crisis. Well, the problem is you can't rely on central banks to, in effect, mask the problems of excessive government spending. So I think some sort of spending cap. And it's not just Switzerland. They have a similar provision in Hong Kong's constitution. The state of Colorado here in the United States has a very successful spending cap. I think spending caps are much more effective than so-called balanced budget amendments, much more effective than the Maastricht criteria, which focus on deficits and debt. Remember, government spending is the underlying problem. Deficits and debt are simply a symptom of the problem. So focus on what really matters, which is controlling government spending.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for being here with us, enlightening thinking. Christoph, let me come to you quickly for before we end with Barbara. You talk about two groups, and I love the metaphor, so I want to come back to that. Group one and group two. It seems that group one, though, is a minority, like in Matrix, as they use the one. So, how can we convince, since you gave a philosophical perspective, so philosophy in a way needs to be spread and it needs to be shared with people. How can we convince people that group one could be the solution in the interest of people?
Well, I think it's not so hard. First of all, I think more people are members of this group one than we think, and then they think themselves. So we need to kind of open their eyes and make them understand what we are talking about. For example, once I was on TV and I just outlined something that was published by another think tank institute. How much do you need to earn in order to pay some craftsman's bill? And if you outline that to the people and show them how much is taken off from your salary, basically your gross salary, how much is taken off in order to get your real purchasing power, people are just simply shocked because it's up to 75%. So we need to start with very simple examples. Show them the reality, show the people the reality, show them what they are going through all the time. And then probably they will start thinking, and this is my experience, they really do, and they start kind of, well, fighting on our side. And I think that's very important.
Thank you so much, Christoph. Barbara, let's end with you. We have 1 minute left. I know you will be in the 1 minute. Take the bet. We sounded with this new reset a bit pessimistic, didn't we? Can we see some optimism? And this is a very large question. And what steps in order to fulfill what Christopher just said? What steps can we take in our community to make sure that there is a reset and is a destruction? To quote Schumpeter, we are starting something new, destroying what came first.
Well, thank you, Pietro. As an Austrian economist, I'm very positive. I don't think in negative terms, and that is why I believe in the creative solutions. So what do we need? First of all, and make people understand, and I think the man on the street, as was just pointed out, understands that economics is not just a zero-sum game. We create added value. Once we trade, once we exchange goods and services, we create added value that is something valuable to us. Second, we need to unleash creativity from regulation and allow enterprises and individuals to solve their problems by themselves, and then also start with the subsidiarity principle also on the local level. And then lastly, I would come back to the third but most important thing: ask what is the task of government and the state. And if we can bring that to a positive answer, which is a limited answer, short answer, so not many tasks, then I think we will go back to the real solution, and we don't have to fear for the future.
Barbara, thank you so much for this optimism. That is a reasonable optimism or rational optimism. I'm not sure I was the best host, but certainly I was surrounded and I was in the company of the best panelists and speakers, and therefore I want to thank very much for their time and for being here with us. First of all, our audience, and I want, please, our audience to share this video once recorded and once online with as many people as possible. So help us bringing these pills of thoughts, of ideas, into the rest of the world. And these pills were provided to you by Competitor and the Austrian Economic Centers as part of the Austrian Economics Monthly. And I want to thank now Barbara Cohen for being here with us, Dan Mitchell and Christopher Zellenberg for their very, very powerful ideas. This is the first series of 2022, last Thursday of January. We meet again on the last Thursday of February. We got very beautiful ideas here, very beautiful issues that we need to challenge in the coming weeks and months, and we will be discussing them within our platform. For the moment, thank you to all for being here with us, and see you very soon. Good night and good luck.